Hello again. Time for part 3 of this. Pick up where we left off. I hope you're comfortable. Clan steps and pressed the intercom button. It let out a tortured mechanical yowl. The noise stopped and a woman's voice said wearily, "Are you selling something?" "I'm the captain. Could you open the door, please?" Yeah, alright. Can't see why not." Something moved heavily behind the door. Bolts drawing back, he thought. "It's open," the woman said. Smith turned the sunken handle and the door swung open easily. The hinges had been greased recently. So too, from the smell of the place, had everything else. Smith ducked under the dangling cable of an intercom and stepped into the cramped hallway, tasting the air as much as smelling it. Surik pulled the door closed behind him. "I shall choose a room as my own." "Rightio," said Smith. To the left was the cockpit. It had 2 proper seats and several which could be folded down in an emergency. One of the large seats, the pilot's, was currently occupied by a smallish woman of about 30. There was a hamster cage on the other seat, the captain's, with the word "Gerald" taped to the front. As Smith entered, the woman took her boots off the main console, sat up and looked about for something to mark the page in the book she had been reading. "Ah," Smith said, consulting the roster sheet. "You must be the crew. Miss Carveth, isn't it?" She stood up. She was smallish, slightly built, with a pretty perky face that was at once unremarkable and difficult to dislike. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a ponytail, leaving a halo of brown roots around her forehead. It was a face that Smith had seen before. She was a simulant, and this was one of the standard facial models that the manufacturers used. She wore a white shirt and utility waistcoat. Her trousers had many pockets and were slightly too big, and had been turned up at the bottom. "Polly Carveth, at your service." "Within reason," she said, looking him over. "You're Captain Smith, right?" She had the demeanour of someone keen not to be volunteered for things. "Indeed. Pleased to meet you. Do feel free to stand at ease." Nothing changed. She could not have got much more at ease without lying down. They shook hands. "Nice to meet you," Carveth said wearily. "I look forward to us working together," she added, with the raw enthusiasm of one reading out a train timetable at gunpoint. She glanced over his shoulder, and suddenly her face became more animated. "Pissing egg! What the hell is that?" "Ah," said Smith. "My friend Surik. He'll be joining us for the trip." Carveth had acquired an expression rarely seen outside Greek tragedy. She groped for words. "Why?" "Well, he's a friend of mine. It's useful for aliens to see the Empire. Helps them understand where all their hard work goes. Besides, he's quite comfortable with space travel. He's bought his own things for his cabin. He's even decorated with a stool." "Oh my God!" "Stool as in chairs, not dung." She brightened slightly, but not much. "But he's big," Carveth observed. "He's got all those bones stuck to him." "He's my friend, Carveth," Smith said coldly, tiring of this argument. "He stays on." Her face came back to life. She considered the matter for a moment, which made her jaw move as if chewing the cud. "He's got tusks and mandibles. It's pretty irregular, Captain." "Mr. Khan said I could." A second passed in which it became obvious to Smith that she was resisting temptation to repeat his last sentence back to him in a squeaky voice. "Right," he said. "If it makes you feel any better, I will talk to Surik myself. But I am the captain here, and we're taking off as I say." "All right, boss." Smith left the room. Carveth crept across the cockpit to the open door and listened. "Pilots are like that," Smith was saying. "A lot of them think of their ships as belonging to them." "A lot of people think of their heads as belonging to them." "Don't start that. You're on the in-flight meals only for this trip, all right?" "Huh, as you wish." Smith returned to find Carveth in the pilot's seat, placed the hamster cage on the floor, dropped into the captain's seat and said, "Rightio, we're all set. I've spoken to Surik and he's agreed and he's agreed to treat you with kid gloves, as it were." "Good," she said, and she gave him a wan, nervous smile. "Let's go then, shall we?" "In a minute. First, as captain, I need to tour the facilities. Second on the left, don't flush until we're in orbit." Isambard Smith slowly wandered the inside of the ship, making sure that everything was all right. Everything certainly seemed present, but beyond that his knowledge thinned out somewhat. Behind the cockpit were the cabins and lavatory. To her credit, Carver had resisted the common practice of putting a humorous sign on the toilet door about the captain's log. Beyond that was an open area that served as a combination of galley and mess. A longer voyage, capsules would be mounted here for suspended animation. The rear of the ship was taken up by the hold, largely empty, where an exploration vehicle could be stashed, but was not. Behind it all were the engine and the various boiler rooms, which Smith intended to have as little to do with as possible. As with every such door he did, he had no idea what he was looking for beyond the strikingly obvious. A fire in his bed or a man's feet hanging from the ceiling would have given him reasonable suspicion that something was amiss. One blinking red light among whole rows of panels of red lights could have been any old thing. Besides, that was someone else's job. As captain, he could delegate to another crew member. That's why ships had captains, to tell the crew what their responsibilities were. Unfortunately, discounting Surrock, an alien, and Gerald, a rodent, that left Carver as the only possible delegate. Finally, Surrock joined him. The alien pointed into the secondary air cleansing drum and said, "This is the bladder of the ship, yes?" And Smith wondered who he was trying to impress. "Absolutely," he said, and he returned to the cockpit. "Ready for take-off," he declared. Carver was reading the Haynes manual for a Sheffield Class 4 light freighter. Smith noticed that by an odd coincidence, this ship was also of that make. He felt mildly bothered, but could not quite put his finger on the source of the problem. Take off, Carver muttered, running a finger down the page. "One moment. Set thrusters." The control panel, much like much of the ship's insides, was squashed and complex. Levers, dials, and spinning counters were separated by delicate brass scrollwork and engineering guild heraldry. Compared to the exterior, the inside of the ship was quite well kept. A loud, indistinct hydraulic whine ran through the room as the great thrusters either side of the craft turned to fire downwards. Smith could hear the engines thrumming, shuddering with constrained power that ran through the floor and into the soles of his boots. In 100 dials the needles quivered and stood up like hairs on the back of an understandably frightened neck. He leaned down and closed his eyes, feeling the craft come to life around him, tense itself to spring. "We have permission to leave from control," Carver said. "Thank them. They say good luck. Cleared for take-off." He opened his eyes. There was a row of junk across the windowsill, picked up from the myriad gift shops of the Empire, a snowstorm paperweight of the Houses of Parliament, a red-coated toy soldier of the Colonial Army, a postcard showing a very fat woman on a trampoline with the caption, "Rotation of the spheres on the Proxima Orbiter." The left side of the ship lurched upwards and Parliament vanished in a blizzard. The postcard fell over. The right thrusters blasted and the ship levelled, rocking very slightly, 9 feet off the ground. "Feed power equally to the thrusters," Carver told herself, and the ship rose slowly. A small and agitated figurehead appeared on the outside view screen, seeming to perform a shamanistic dance. Parker's frequent upward gestures gave the impression that he sought to placitate the sky god before the ship intruded into its realm. "Whatever's he up to?" said Smith, as the craft rose higher and the figure became increasingly small and more frantic. Carver clicked her fingers as if remembering something on a shopping list, picked up the microphone. "Control, could you open the overhead doors, please?"